So we have no live stream. I hope that everyone find a place, and I try to record that anyhow. So there is a recording. I know that. So it's recorded anyway. Okay, so I don't see your video. Now I see you again. Mic is working, so everyone sees us. So I would like to, Marco, could you just, okay, I can invite you to stage. So, perfect. Okay, Marco is co-host today. And I'm really happy, and I'm so sorry to everyone. I just messed up something with the tech, so sorry for that. But I would like to welcome you, dear Designsman community, and I would like to welcome you to the Google Designsman Chapter Meetup today. And we will have expert knowledge about how to test business idea and strategic hypothesis. And I'm Sabrina. I'm a design strategist, founder of the Designsman Studio. I'm located here in Stuttgart, Germany. And together with Marco Velasco, we are your hosts today. And this event tonight is perfect. It's a perfect fit for the previous sessions. So we had two meetups about strategy design sprint. And this is a perfect fit now because in the strategy design sprint, so let's say to do a strategy, you need to test your ideas, your business ideas. And to innovate and create effective businesses or products, we know that you need to test them and to create evidence. And now we are really happy to have the master of testing with us, David Bland, and we are excited to get insights beyond his book, Testing Business Ideas. So this one here. And before I hand it over to Marco, who is even a bigger fan of David, I want to give you a quick overview about the session today. And I'm really sorry that we started now later. I hope, David, you don't have a hard cut at, let's say, hour 7. I think it's 11 now. So we will be here in this session with David for 1 hour. So he will give us a keynote about his concept. He also has prepared an exercise with us, and then we have time for a Q&A. And after the session, we will meet again in the lounge, and you can have, let's say, you can meet at tables, or you can also have these one-on-one networking sessions. So now I would like to hand it over to Marco, and also I leave again the link for the mural board to connect here.
Thank you, Sabrina. David, thank you for being at this meetup with us. I'm personally a huge fan of your work on your latest book, Testing Business Ideas, alongside the innovation and rockstar Alex Osterwalder. And I think you did a great job because our community was waiting for such a straightforward and playful experimentation process. And thank you for that. As Sabrina mentioned, we are promoting the Strategy Design Sprint Framework. The most important part of this process is testing our strategic hypothesis to have a greater certainty of the way forward. As you mentioned in your books, there are 4 areas of risk: desirability, feasibility, viability, and adaptability. The latter is the area that you last deepen, but in the case of strategy, it is fundamental. When considering during your presentation, could you dig a little deeper on this topic? And thank you, David, and welcome to this community.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad the book landed so well with people. You know, we tried to test our way through it, and you don't always know until you get it out there. So it could feel like a very big waterfall project. So I appreciate all the kind words. So what I'll do is I will share my screen, hopefully. I haven't tried this yet in Airmeet. So hopefully it doesn't ask me on my Mac to give a ton of permissions. Let's see. All right. Cool. All right. So you all can see my screen, it seems. Okay. So basically what I wanted to do is give you some framing of, well, a little bit about myself, but not much. I want to talk more about how to help you all. My background, design, mostly startups, and then learned the hard way at a couple startups, whether what worked and what didn't. And from there, about 10 years ago, moved to the San Francisco Bay Area and really started helping companies learn from my mistakes. And so I work with a lot of startups and accelerators in Silicon Valley, but I also work with a lot of corporations, also with my co-author, Alex Osterwalder, who you all know very well. And it's all similar, though, startups or bigger companies, about how to test your ideas. And so that's why we wrote the book. We just kept running into teams who lacked options, and we just wanted to give them something very actionable to, to actually use as a recipe. The goal for this one today for me is basically help you kind of de-risk your business and product ideas. It goes really well with the sprint process. Google has picked up assumptions mapping as part of the design sprint kit. And I gave a talk with Google before the pandemic with Kai Haley, who leads their developer advocacy program. And, the sprint process has evolved quite a bit over the last, several years. And it was really exciting for me to hear, some of this work being pulled into design sprints, because I think there's a lot of overlap about how you prioritize and then how you test your assumptions. So my goal is to help you all with stuff that you're working on. I do have a code of conduct for every talk and workshop I do, which is just be mindful. It's basically the Bill and Ted code of conduct, which is be excellent to one another. So when we're sharing out and giving feedback, please be respectful in tone and have constructive disagreement. So what I want to do is kind of pull this up, and you all, let me remove my outline here. So you all are really aware of this tool. So, but I thought we would kind of dive into it a little bit, and maybe I can explain a little of our thinking behind why we kind of framed it the way we did. So quite often, pulling from design thinking, there were 3 themes and a 4th that was also added by Alex in the Invincible Company book. But basically desirability. So, what is your risk around your value proposition, your customer, the relationships, your channels. So think about a lot of market risk, desirability risk, viability, which is around cost usually. So the kind of should we do it question, cost and revenue. Now, granted, you should have ethically, like moral decisions when you're answering the should we do this question. In addition to that, do you have a startup or do you have a hobby? If you don't have a business model, you probably have a hobby. So make sure it can sustain financially. And then feasibility, which is more around the backstage of the can we do it question. So around activities and resources and partners. So not just technical feasibility, and this is where I slightly differ from the IDEO framing and Stanford D School framing, is if you look back to the old school Larry Keeley framing of things, Larry from Doblin Group, he drew this as a triangle, and I thought it was a lot more closer to like the source of truth. Even though it's really hard in design thinking land to trace things back because they go through human-centered design. But not just technical feasibility, but beyond that, it's overall execution. So with regards to, sometimes you hit regulatory issues or, especially in the EU, right, with privacy. Just because you can do it doesn't mean necessarily they'll allow you to do it. So, I'm based out here in California. The laws are a little different. The last workshop I did in Munich, in Germany, the privacy laws are different there. So some of the tactics with feasibility don't work as well, or you just have to be more mindful of them. Now, adaptability is also something we do talk about. And I'm not going to super deep dive on it today, because Alex and I are still calibrating what we mean when we talk about adaptability. In the Invincible Company book, he really starts to lay out more of the market forces. And he was already doing a lot of that work with business model environment. So if you go back to the first book, which is Business Model Generation, and you kind of flip to the back, which I don't think a lot of people made it to the back of that book, but if you do make it to the back, there's a lot of awesome stuff about the business model environment. And a lot of that's been matured. And obviously that was 10 years ago. So the thinking around adaptability is more about the market forces around your model, because you don't necessarily, your model doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so when you think about regulatory trends, socioeconomic trends, and how they impact you, Alex and I are still reconciling what that means. The way I addressed it in the business model, or in the Testing Business Ideas book, was I felt that adaptability was really these external forces that shaped your desirability, viability, feasibility assumptions. So for example, if you have a competitor that is pushing, from the outside in, then that should be reflected as, an assumption already around desirability, viability, or feasibility, whether it be how you place yourself in the market, or how you partner on the backstage, or how you price things. Alex also takes a adaptability theme. And so even he and I are still reconciling how exactly we want to go through with it. But I think in the Testing Business Ideas book, I focus more on these three. The Invincible Company book obviously goes more into adaptability and a lot of patterns, which has been really helpful for a lot of teams I work with. So one of the ways I help teams kind of work through this, and why we layer this framing on top of a canvas, which was help them focus. So, if you're going through, okay, who's my customer segment? What's my value prop to them? How do I, acquire and distribute to them? What's the nature of my relationship with them? You'll notice, a lot of times, especially in the sprint framework too, it's a lot of desirability risk. And I think that helps teams focus and put it like a lens, another lens on top of this of, oh, maybe if I'm just starting out, a lot of my risk could potentially be over here with the customer, the value prop, your channels, your relationships. And then with your with your revenue streams, it's more around a little bit of viability risk, but not all of it, because it's just the pricing side, right? You still have to figure out the backstage. And then when you look at the backstage of your canvas, think about the activities you need to be doing, so verbs, the resources you need, which are nouns, so think physical and digital resources, and then your cost structure. That is talking more about backstage. Can we do that, which affects your cost? And then, who you partner with. So, this isn't the only way you fill out a canvas, but quite often I'm going through this relationship of, how do you deliver your value to your customers? How do you reach them? What's the nature of your relationship with them? And then how do you generate revenue from your customers, whether directly or indirectly? And then backstage, the activities and resources, you can say, okay, our costs come from these two. And then if we partner with somebody, they should bring an activity or a resource that we don't have, or even potentially create a channel that we need to get to our customer. And so when I start working with teams, kind of building off of Alex's great work and foundation, it's more about, do they understand the relationships between each of these? And do we understand where our risk is? And quite often, I think teams don't quite understand that. They treat it almost like a checkbox. It's like, check, yep, got a value prop, yep, have a customer. And then they don't really have, they really put it into action and go test it. And so that was one of the things we tried to stress in our book. And it's basically based off how I coach teams. I feel like, some of the editorial advice I got from Wiley was, call the book what it does, which we did, Testing Business Ideas, and write it like you're coaching teams, which it was pretty easy for me to do, because that's all I do is coach teams. So being able to basically say, okay, when I'm writing this section, what would it be like if I was sitting in front of a team giving this advice, or what was it like in the past? And I don't want to completely neglect adaptability, but when we talk about, adaptability, it's very much these forces that are playing around the outside of your canvas. And so those market forces, economic forces, regulatory forces, those are more around what are those forces at play. And so that's usually the first question that comes up when I'm sketching this out is, well, where's our competitors? Where's that box? It's like, it's not really a box, but it's certainly a force on the outside, sort of, informing or shaping your business model. And it changes over time. So basically what we did is I've been doing a lot of work in the lean startup space for quite some time. And so one of the things we decided to do was sort of what's the on-road, what's the input here into how do you look at your risk, and then how do you design experiments. And so what we typically do is once we have a canvas sketched out, we start writing these, I call them assumptions down, because they're basically beliefs that you have. And so we use, I like orange for desirability, I like green for viability, and I like blue for feasibility. You can use whatever colors you like, but that's kind of 3 common Post-it colors. And now that we're all virtual, I guess it doesn't matter as much. And then when we write these, we typically write them as statements. And so we write them as we believe. And we do that because I want these to be statements, like beliefs that you're writing down. And therefore, when we map them, we can say, well, how much evidence do we have and how important is it? And so essentially what we do is we take those over into a 2x2 exercise that I call assumptions mapping. And I first came across this 2x2 when I was working with Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden, who wrote Lean UX. I work with them at Neo. I was a principal at Neo out of the San Francisco office. They were based out of the New York office. Jeff's now based out of Barcelona. But while we worked together at Neo, I loved their 2x2, but my teams kept struggling with it because they didn't know what kind of risk they had, and the axes just needed a little tweaking. So basically I tested it with hundreds of teams, and ended up on these axes of important. So how important is it? And basically, do you have any evidence to support? And so what happened there was Alex and I kept having this conversation. We were whiteboarding at Stanford University at the library, because he was flying over to do something in California from Switzerland. And I was like, Alex, this 2x2 I use works, and here's how I see it working. And he was very skeptical. It's not easy to convince Alex to use tools, by the way, that he has not used before. And where we had a problem was this evidence and no evidence conversation. If you Google assumptions mapping, what you'll probably see are different versions of it, because I kept testing it as you would a tool. And so I had known and unknown, which worked okay. But then I'd have these really strong opinions in the room that would say, they put a sticky there and they would say, well, I just know. I was like, how do you know? And you're like, well, I just know. And I was like, okay, that's not really getting to a conversation about evidence. So I changed it to certain and uncertain. I was like, oh, that'll work. And then same situation, strong personalities would put a sticky there. And I would say, well, why did you put that there? And they would say, well, I'm certain. I was like, well, why are you certain? And they would say, well, I just know. I was like, okay, this still isn't working. And so finally, Alex was like, why don't you just say evidence and no evidence? Because that's what we're trying to get to. And that was Alex's turn to convince me about something. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I've already used 2 other labels. I don't think evidence is going to work. And finally, I tried it. And we had this kind of aha moment where, these strong personalities would put a sticky down. And then we would say, all right, how did you put that there? Explain it. And they're like, well, I just know. And I was like, okay, but do you have any evidence to support that statement? And because it's evidence, right? It's not just no, it's not just gut. Do you have any evidence to support it? Observable evidence, quantitative, qualitative. And they would say, well, no, I don't have any evidence. So finally, okay, well, that goes over here. So we're finally able to kind of iterate through it. Like I said, it was probably 5 years worth of iteration. Yeah, at least 5. And the colors I love, because you come over with these risks and it's like, oh, okay, we have desirability and viability and feasibility. And you can start getting an idea, like, what are the most important things where you have no evidence? And then, like, what kind of risk do you have? And I think that really helps the teams, because then it starts to framing, oh, we never actually talked to customers. So that's a lot of our risk, because we don't know if they actually have this problem of experiments. And so, there's 44 of them in the book. And the way we themed them was around desirability, viability, feasibility, which was a pretty ambitious exercise, I have to say. It's not like I'm an expert in all 44 or created all 44. They're ones I've been around and coached teams on, and some I know better than others. But we really strongly agreed that people don't need another list of stuff. Okay. There are plenty of lists out there online and ebooks. There are plenty of them out there, but where people need help is how to choose. And so the themes we found really help. So just kind of backing out a little bit for you, basically sketch out your canvas, write down your assumptions as we believe, move them over and map them. And then from there, that's when we start refining into something, a little more testable and matching it to an experiment. And so I've learned the hard way. I usually don't refine before I map, because then people map things and they end up being done like unimportant. And they're like, why did I refine that if it's just going to be, unimportant? And the other thing is, just being able to say, who cares about anything below the line? Like, really, if you're going to experiment, don't make the mistake I did, where you have people go, oh, I have a lot of evidence and this is not important, but it'd be really fun to do a landing page. That is a trap. Do not fall into that trap. You really need to be able to say, well, maybe instead of doing stuff that's just fun, we actually, focus on the things that are the riskiest, which are the things that are most important, where we have no evidence. So the goal is not to run experiments. The goal is to basically de-risk your product or business or service. So what we did is we kind of applied this taxonomy. It works pretty well. There are some problems with it that we'll have to address in the second edition of the book. The book's over a year old now. The themes hold up pretty well: desirability, feasibility, and viability. So that helps people find what they need. The times, what we did is we said it takes some of these longer to set up than others, and others longer to run than others. So we broke out time into setup and in runtime to help people. And then with capabilities, we were like, what are the capabilities we tend to see people need to do these? Sometimes if you don't have design capability, it's not the end of the world. You could just use a tool that has templates. But, what are the capabilities? The costs are pretty general overview of cost. They vary per, sector, per business. But, we try to make it a point not to put any really, really expensive experiments in the book, because quite honestly, we want you to defer building as long as possible. And then we want you to basically generate evidence and then move on to something that gives you a little more. And I would say, out of everything, the evidence strength is probably where people are still confused, even with the book. So, we tried to address this with dots of like low evidence and basically stronger evidence, like weaker and stronger. And I think the way we do it in our master classes, so we have a master class coming up here in May, and then Alex and I are going to do another one probably in the fall. And those fill up pretty quickly, but we try to go beyond the book in those master classes and explain like our latest thinking on stuff. And so if you think of evidence strength, basically if you think of strong evidence versus weak evidence, I don't think it came across in the book because it's just in the words. And most of the book is very visual, right? And so, if you talk about what people do, that's pretty strong. But if you talk about what they say, that's rather weak, because what they say is different than what they do. It's kind of like espouse theory in action. If you're looking at facts, right, that's pretty strong evidence. But if you're looking at opinions, well, that's not very strong. It doesn't mean you completely ignore it, but you just need to be mindful of, it's weak evidence, right? So you're not going to generate stronger evidence by just interviewing people over and over again. Like if you interviewed 100 people versus 500 people, it's not like your evidence is any stronger. Like you have some great qualitative feedback, but you just have to be mindful of it's kind of what they say and not what they do. The other way we try to frame this is if you think of a lab setting, that's pretty weak. So think of you opting somebody into a focus group or something. Not that I'm a big fan of focus groups, but or a lab like an innovation lab, or back before the pandemic, you invite people into your office, even to test stuff. That's kind of like a lab setting versus more like the real world. That is more kind of stronger evidence if you're doing it out in the real world. And then the last one here is sort of more around investment. So like if you think of low investment, quite often think about like email, right? So I think this is where people trip up with landing pages, so giving up an email on a landing page is pretty low investment, but a high investment is kind of stronger evidence. And quite often, that's like asking for payment information. And so I don't think this comes across really well in the book, but we do address this in a lot of our workshops and coaching. But, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to drive to stronger evidence over time. So getting out of what people say, just opinions in a lab with very low level investment, to get something that's more about what people do, looking at facts. All these experiments. I had a crisis where I thought I was just going to organize this book because I was, doing a lot of the writing early on of just desirability, viability, feasibility, and I'd be done. That didn't work out at all. So it was pretty obvious that wasn't working, mostly because the experiments sometimes can test both or all three and not just one theme. And then I didn't want to duplicate content through the book. And so we landed on kind of discovery as one, and discovery kind of pulling from Steve Blank's customer discovery from 4 Steps to Epiphany, and laying out what are these like open-ended directional hypotheses that you would, if you're going from almost like no evidence to some evidence, what are the things you would do for more open-ended directional work? And a lot of that you already know. You're already like experts in that in the sprint world of how would you do like a facilitated exercise like innovation games versus doing some lightweight like paper prototyping, things like that. And then the other collection we have are around validation. Again, kind of pulling from Steve's work there. The only caveat there is I think in Steve's work, right, it's very much like customer discovery, customer validation. And what we're trying to do is go beyond the customer and talk about viability and also like backstage risk. And so that's why it's not framed that way in this book, because we try to do desirability, viability, and feasibility. And so I tried to write an entire book without using the phrase MVP. I was almost successful, not quite. And people don't know, like Eric, as much as I love Eric Ries and I've worked with him in the past, he didn't coin that term, right? That was Frank Robinson in 2001. So a lot of these terms were not coined in the lean startup. They were just popularized in it. Same thing with a lot of Steve Blank stuff, like it's old B2B sales stuff. But the way I tried to bring the conversation down to something that's more actionable was around, okay, what are the types of MVPs I really see? Well, one is concierge, where you manually deliver the value by hand. Another one is Wizard of Oz, where it's basically similar to concierge, but it's not obvious the person's involved. So think about like man behind the curtain kind of thing. Next is single feature MVP, which think about the Amazon Dash buttons are a great example. There's this little button they used to have where you press it and it would just order the thing you pressed. Early days Foursquare, where you just check in, just do one thing. And then mashup. And a lot of the, no code movement has kind of taken over mashups, which is sort of like you're taking existing things and mashing them up and delivering value that way. So there's a real value exchange in a lot of the validation experiments. But you'll notice, what I try to do is say, like, do as much as you can before building. So a lot of these like heavy, I would say somewhat heavy lift MVPs are further down on the list as far as, yeah, they're strong evidence, but they also cost more and it'll take you longer to do. So at least have some evidence before you jump in and do that. So really quickly, I just kind of give you an idea of how I approach this with teams. One is, treating ads and early stage acquisition as experiments. So basically, I love this framing from Steve, which is, do people have the problem? Are they aware? And are they actively seeking a solution to the problem? And so quite often that affects how I do ads. So like I was working with one team where we had like Facebook ads, right? And we were just pushing people that we thought had the problem and were aware to a page. And we only had 1% conversion on our landing page, which is not great, by the way. Like I usually aim for about 15. So that's like 1 out of every 100, right? Willing to give up their email, which is not great because that's even weak strength of evidence too. And then before they gave up, we said, well, where would people go to seek a solution to this? And quite often it was Google. And so what we did is we ran Google search only ads. Same page and everything. And we got a 40% conversion there. So, I mean, that's a big difference between 1% and 40%. That's we're going to kill this thing and versus we're going to persevere, So I would say just start treating some of your things that you wouldn't necessarily call an experiment. Start treating them like what's the hypothesis I'm going to test? Where are our customers on this journey? What were like the success metrics that we would look for, So basically I treat something like ads very much like experiments so that we can experiment our way through it. Another example would be Concierge, and these are by far like the most fun for me. These and Wizard of Oz. And when I work with teams, they can just like tap into your creativity. So it's really awesome to see. And so, back behind the scenes, they're kind of creating this, but there's a real value exchange here where the person is, delivering the value and they're paying for it. So, it tests all 3 themes. So you can test desirability. So that's more that customer interaction, viability, they're paying for it, and your backstage costs, and feasibility, whether you can actually do it manually or not. And so the evidence strength is really strong. Now, Wizard of Oz is slightly different because when you think of Wizard of Oz, basically what you would do is say, okay, there's not a person here, and this person's still paying, but there's like a bot or something, it's like it's a really terrible robot, but so there's like a robot that's like SMS or a chat bot or something or something they're interacting with, but in really behind the scenes, these are just people, right? So that's why Wizard of Oz is a little interesting because you take the bias out of like interacting personally with somebody. But you have to be kind of, obviously mindful of when you do these. But I love them because the strong strength of evidence, you tap in your team's creativity. It doesn't matter if it doesn't scale, you're able to basically kind of go through it with the teams. So what I wanted to do, and I'll paste this in the chat link here. So this is the mural board I'm using. Feel free to enter as visitor, so you don't have to create an account. For those of you who have accounts, you can sign in if you want, but enter as visitor works. You'll be anonymous snail or whatever. So what I thought could be interesting for an exercise that we do together would be, how do we create like a sequence for something that you're working on, if you're willing to share it? And so what I've done, for those of you who don't have the book, I know some of you do, which is great. I have a cheat sheet here of some of the experiments in the book. Now, it doesn't go as deep as the book does, but you can get like a little 1-page idea of, okay, so what's this? And these are all, Wiley IP, so please don't like download these and start sharing them on the internet. But basically for us hanging out today, how would we kind of look through these and say, well, what would I do? Like, what would you do to de-risk something you're working on? And I love the idea of sequences because it's more than just one experiment. And quite often you're going to have to run more than one experiment. I've never worked with a team yet where it was, hey, we have a hypothesis, let's run an experiment. Oh, it's $1 million success and we're just going to like go scale it. It's never that way. It's always messy. So many ideas I've worked on completely changed before they launched on the customer or on their value prop. So it's pretty common. So what I thought, I'll just create a sample one here, and you guys, you all can get a feel for kind of what I'm talking about. So let's do a fun one. So let's do a team in New York. They were working on an SMS-based chatbot for men's dating advice. So that was their product. That was their business they were working on. And to do that, they did a couple things. One, they did customer interviews. So they started interviewing men and asking, where they go to get dating advice. What were the problems about getting in dating advice? Were they embarrassed, whatnot. They also did some paper prototyping. So it was like, before we build out an entire bot, what would the flow look like? How would people interact with it? Just lightweight, paper stuff that you all know really well. They also did a landing page. So this was a landing page with what the bot does, very just simple one pager. They also went on to discussion forums. And quite frankly, they went on to Hacker News, which is, we'll talk about in a second, which might have caused problems, to say like, hey, we have a chat bot that can actually give you dating advice. And then they did a Wizard of Oz test, which was, instead of having a chat bot, they basically hired a team of women to respond to texts from men who were clueless about dating. And I still have screenshots of some of these tests. They were really, really interesting. But a lot of them were just like, hey, I need a restaurant in like San Francisco that's not too loud that I can take a first date on. Like, what would you recommend? And so what kind of happened here is they took what they learned from customer interviews. Okay. They informed their paper prototyping based on, jobs, pains, and gains of the customer, of men who need dating advice. From there, from the paper prototyping, they basically sketched out what the page could be, right? With a simple call to action. They went on discussion forums and started finding out like where would our customers be online and offline. Online, there were certain forums that they felt like would have the target customer. And then they did a Wizard of Oz. Now here's where it all horribly went awry, which often happens with experiments. So about here, they received 1,000 signups in the first couple hours. So when you get 1,000 signups from your MVP in a couple hours, what happens is the women became completely overwhelmed with requests and they couldn't respond. And then the men on discussion forums were complaining that they were so hopeless that the bots were even ignoring them. And that was not our intent. So in hindsight, here on the discussion forums, there would have been like back here on the landing page, a wait list option, not a just start texting the bot, because in reality, the bot was a team of a few women. So this one was shut down eventually because it wasn't that people weren't willing to text a bot for advice. It was because of the viability challenges we have. It was just really hard to make money with it. But overall, it was a pretty interesting kind of series of experiments. So what I thought we could do, for those of you familiar with Mural, all you do is bottom right, you can use to navigate around. You can double click to create a sticky. So it's pretty simple to create a sticky. And what I'm going to do is give you like 5 minutes to think about something you're working on. If you're willing to share it with the group, great. And basically just create a sequence. Like, what are a few experiments you thought you think might bring you more evidence to know, hey, am I on the right track with this thing or not? Okay. So I'm going to set a timer up here in Mural for 5 minutes. I'll play some music for you all, and we'll try to share out and do some Q&A. Okay. So just think of something you're working on. And if you're willing, double click, start typing in some of the experiments. So check out the discovery and the validation ones on the left. And I know we can't get through all 44 today, but give you some practice with them. All right, so 5 minutes and go. You have 2 minutes left. All right, try to finish up. Oh, I love their seatbelt sound. Okay, so who would like to, and Sabrina, I might need your help with this. Who would like to, do we have the ability to have somebody unmute and share?
Sure.
So who would like to share? I don't know who actually, because you're all visiting ladybugs and snails, but did anybody create one here? I see a few of them. Would like to just kind of share with the larger group.
Okay. We have Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hello, together. Yeah, I am. I posted some stickies. I think it's this area starting with online survey. I don't know if you can zoom in a little. Yes, the one. Yes, here. So this is a current project we are doing right now to test the ideas. And we started with an online survey, very simple one, which out via social media channels to get some feedback. And then we already have a very simple landing page we can show some basic information to the idea. Maybe information to our idea is to establish a platform which can the users who can book somebody to do a haircut at home for them. You can book a hair for somebody to to styling your hairs at your home. And we have already done a simple landing page. What we discussed yesterday to do is to invite some test users from our friends and family circle. And then the next step, we are going to show if we are going to onboard, for example, 30 potential test users on this platform. And then we are going to show this 30 these potential customers to somebody who is going to do simple haircuts to these customers. And then we will continue to do experiment to see, okay, if people will use this kind of platform to book somebody doing hairstyling.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you have a multi-sided market there, right? Is you have the people that want the haircuts at home, and you have the people performing the haircuts, right? And so being able to sort of concierge that, I think, makes a lot of sense. Most platforms take, anywhere from 9 months to a year to really figure out supply and demand, even when you're testing your way through it. So it does take a while, but I think anything you can do to not jump to platform building and be like, can I facilitate this? And then get feedback on how valuable it was from both sides. And quite often with these platforms, thinking through how you tailor your value proposition, because on one side is probably more broad, right? It's people that want haircuts at home, but then on the other side, it's more about how do I get hairdressers or barbers onboarded in a way, and are they willing? Like, is there my value prop to them is we could generate revenue, and also, but it's near you. You don't have to travel very far. We take all the friction out of it. You just show up and do awesome work. Like, there's a hand-holding process there too. So, yeah, I would just say with surveys, just be careful. Quite often, I like having a hypothesis behind the survey, and that helps me inform the survey design. And so surveys are pretty weak evidence, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. It just means that, what people type in a survey often isn't what they do. So anything that you can have a hypothesis behind it to kind of frame the survey, and then have a call to action, being willing to contact them or have them, select in on the landing page in some way. But yeah. And so basically just being able to take what you've learned from one thing, spin it into the next, take what you've learned from that, spin it into the next, and just kind of gradually increase the evidence that you're on the right track or not. So, yeah, I like how you're thinking about it. Cool. I don't know on timing. I know we got started a little late and we want to do Q&A.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I think we start with the Q&A. Okay. We have another raised hand. It's Mani. Maybe you also have a question, but we already have some questions here. So let me see. So they are not in the question area. They are in the chat. So I need to scroll a bit. I see from something with the blue ocean. Okay, it's from Eric. Regarding adaptability, do you differentiate between blue ocean and red ocean? Eric, do you want to come up on stage? So please raise your hand. Then I can bring you on stage. If not, you can already, David, what do you think? Or what is your thought about that?
Yeah, I like the ocean framing strategy from, Blue Ocean strategy. I think it's makes sense to know whether you're kind of in, I don't want to say a race to the bottom, but red ocean is very usually a crowded thing versus blue ocean where you're trying to create a new market. So quite often the environments look different. When you see the environment around your canvas, especially with competitors, it can look a little different. But I don't necessarily call it out specifically. What I do though is sometimes, especially in ideation workshops with the business modeling, we'll use the blue ocean strategy. Like Alex and I will use that to, kind of like the 4 actions framework quite often, of how to get people to think about how to re-envision. So, one of the case studies in the book is from Zoku. And so Zoku is basically ex-Citizen M people who are creating a Citizen M-like experience, but for long-term stay. And so Citizen M, I don't know if you ever stayed one. I stayed in one in London before the pandemic hit, and they're great, but you don't want to really stay in them for very long. Like 3 or 4 days max. And so he wanted to do more of a long-term micro living experience, and so that's very much blue ocean. And his case study in the book was he did a life-size prototype of one space and tested it with customers, tested it with cleaners, which I thought was interesting because basically he was like, well, people can like it, but then if it's really expensive to clean, it's not financially viable. And so I thought it was a really smart way to approach it. But I don't necessarily designate red versus blue around the environment. It's usually something either I do an ideation workshop prior to it, or it just comes out in do we have a lot of competitors or not?
Okay, thank you. So we have another question from Najid. He wants to just come up on stage. Hi, Najid.
Hey, Sabrina, thanks. And thanks, David. It was really helpful. I've been following your book for quite some time. So, So one of the scenarios which I want to kind of discuss with you is around how do you scale this up when it comes to multi-stakeholder environment, like especially healthcare, for example. You can validate something with a patient, but then you have to go and validate it with a doctor and insurances, and it kind of goes in a lot of different directions with multi-stakeholder environments. How do you kind of handle that? And the second question, an extension to this, is the same problem happens with the B2B scenarios where these customers are kind of not very easy to access. So what happens in those scenarios? How do you kind of tackle that, those kind of environments?
Yeah, so a couple things there. Again, I model things much off like Steve Blank's work, right? So who's the user customer, who's the influencer, recommender, who's the economic buyer, who's the decision maker. And then I try not to label people saboteurs, even though that is one of the framings of people that are actively sabotaging you. I try not to label people that way, but I do use the others, specifically user customer, economic buyer, and decision maker. And so quite often what we'll do is we'll create value prop canvases for each, try to understand their jobs, pains, and gains. And then we'll also start testing our value proposition. So in a complex B2B world, in healthcare, for example, we have an overall value proposition, but then we have to like really dial into what's our value prop to each segment. And then in that world, are there more like value statements to each, because the user customer cares about one thing versus that person that controls the budget versus the person that has the decision-making authority. And so it's quite time consuming, but it's certainly doable. And so we just start to unpack it. And then we usually start with, if we do something like assumptions mapping, it would be trying to tease out if this one isn't, if this isn't true, do the rest of it, does it completely unravel and fall apart? So we try to look for those kind of assumptions where basically, like if we can't, so for hospitals, for example, if we can't get the administrator on board, it kind of doesn't matter if we have the nurses on board. And so we'll do something like, when we're testing, have the nurse say, will you write a letter of recommendation to your administrator? And if they won't, then we realize we have a problem, because we have people saying, oh yeah, that's cool, I would use it. And then they won't even write a letter that's non-legally binding. It's literally just putting things in words. So there are ways around it, but it does take time. A lot of my work is in B2B. So I think the biggest challenge with B2B is people just assume you're going to be selling them anytime you're talking to them. And so what has happened in the pandemic is everybody's at home. So you're able to get to people through LinkedIn more than you would have before, and their Gmail, because they're not sitting in an office usually in a giant building anymore. They're at home. So that's basically being able to, get to them. And usually you just prey on their expertise. You're just like, I'm not going to pitch you There was a great example. I was on a Clubhouse for like, I don't know, way too long last night. And the one I read was from Jason Cohen, who kind of founded WP Engine. And I'll kind of read it out for you. But the way he says, he's like, hey, I'm the founder of a new WordPress hosting company. That's his opening line. And it's designed for folks like you. I'd love to talk about, any passion you have with WordPress and get some feedback. Then his next line, which I thought was super interesting, the last two, was like, I know your time is valuable. I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to grab time from you. And then he ended with, I'm very happy to pay you whatever you think for your hourly rate, even above it, because I know this is a weird one-off request. And when he did that on LinkedIn, he got like 30, so he went after like 30 people, had a 100% response rate, and none of them actually asked for him to pay them anything. So there are very specific ways on LinkedIn now that I feel like work that maybe didn't work before because we're all at home. So don't sleep on LinkedIn for, now granted, frontline workers aside, it's going to be really hard in a pandemic to get their time. But there are a lot of ways you can get to people on LinkedIn now that just weren't working that well before the pandemic.
So just in this case, like, would you go for solving a problem for the buyer first, or you should be focusing on user first? Like, this is always confusion, right?
Yeah. So there are a couple ways to approach it. Sometimes I start with the decision maker and just try to make sure that we're not spending a lot of time. I see a lot of failed products B2B who did awesome freemium for user customers, but they didn't have any budget. And I know everyone loves to point to Dropbox, but Dropbox had a very specific strategy and an amazing sales team. And that's one of the reasons, a couple of reasons why they succeeded. So I usually start at the decision maker, but if I'm having problems in that conversation, what I'll do is I'll start with the end customer, generate evidence, and use that as leverage in the conversation with decision maker. So one of my favorite stories is like selling stuff through Victoria's Secret, testing within customers, selling to women directly, getting testimonials, getting evidence, and then going to Victoria's Secret and saying, when they say, oh, nobody would want this, we can say, wow, we've sold 1,000 of these already, and here are testimonials. And that changes the entire dynamic of the conversation. So if you start with the end customer, even if you'll never be direct to them and never be direct to consumer, it's worth doing just to get the evidence to use as leverage in the conversation with the decision maker.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you, Arnajit. So we have another question, which is from Itamar. So I will take him on stage. Hi, Itamar.
Hello there.
Nice to see you. Hello.
Hi. So I do have a question. I just finished actually reading the book, The Testing Business Ideas. And I saw in the book that you pretty much plug the framework into the business model canvas. I'm wondering, how do you bring the framework to a team that might not be responsible for the whole life cycle of the product, right? Say, we might not be responsible for channels. We might not be responsible for like the partners and stuff. Let's say, for example, how do you bring that down all the way to the Scrum team level, for example? And so, and that's my question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously, if I'm writing a book with Alex Osterwalder, it's going to be the business model canvas. I think that's pretty obvious. However, I have been doing this work for a long time, and there are different on-ramps into assumptions mapping. So I don't know if you've noticed on my site even, and I can put it in chat before we leave, but I have questionnaires I ask. So sometimes I'm working with teams and I just ask them questions, which is kind of a cheat sheet, or I'll customize those questions. Quite often with Agile teams, we'll look at the epics that are coming into some of these big things that have assumptions baked in. They're coming into your roadmap, and we'll do mapping there, and we'll say, okay, I don't want to use, in Agile, right, quite often the framing is like, as a user, I want features so that benefit, or something like that. I'll start teasing out, so what are our assumptions around the user? What are our assumptions around this feature? What are our assumptions around the benefit? And I have some videos on that also on my site that they have for free. But there are different on-ramps into the 2x2 prioritization. And then from there, the experiment library still holds up for the most part, because you're still matching experiments to your risk. So don't feel like you have to always use a business model canvas or a value prop canvas for it. I mean, obviously I use that a lot of the time. But if I'm working with teams where the tool just doesn't make sense for the team's context, then I'll typically either focus on their roadmap and what are these epics coming through, or what are these big things they're worried about, and I'll also just facilitate the conversation a little differently, but still get to what are the things that have to be true where you have the least amount of evidence. And so I think you have to be careful with anything around Agile and Scrum, that you don't necessarily treat your backlog as facts and then just incrementally deliver, over a series of sprints. Quite often I've done that at startups, and we built stuff that nobody cared about, but we did it in a very agile way. And so that's why I got pulled in a lot of Eric Ree's work early on, because 2 startups failed because, hey, we were all doing daily stand-ups, having retrospectives, doing demos, doing the planning. We had all our stories along the wall. We're pair programming, doing TDD. In the end, none of it mattered because the customers didn't want what we were building. So it felt better, but in the end, it's like, wow, I don't want to say wasted 2 years, but I think we should have applied some of those principles earlier upstream into the customer and discovery, and we didn't. So long answer there, but don't feel like you're locked into a specific canvas. What I would recommend is thinking about different on-ramps into that 2x2, and then making sure they're still designing experiments that match the risk. And then from there, if you're doing like dual track discovery delivery kind of sprints, a lot of this is going to feed into your discovery work and help shape your backlog. So that's how I approach it.
Great, thanks.
So thank you. I know we are already over time, and David, I also want to respect your time. Do you think maybe we could just go until your 11:30? So another 9 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. So because I have another question, and I know Marco has a question as well, and I have also a little question. So I would like to ask, so Ivailo put that question on. Do you want to come on stage? Then raise your hand. If not, I will just start asking the question. So yeah, I see he wants to come on stage. So thanks, Itamar, and welcome, Ivailo. And maybe you have put 2 questions. Maybe you can just take one question. Oh, now he's gone. Okay, he's just disappeared now. Try again. Okay, Ivailo.
So
question.
basically my question is when to use these different kind of canvases and maps, and also how do you convince management to invest time in such activities? So, and also how do you start? And I even put a very specific example, which is actually part of my past when I was involved in a team. But then management says, "Oh, this so very time consuming. We should not do that," and so on. So, these are many questions. But how do you approach such kind of situations, and how do you choose which of the
I mean, it does take some practice. Quite often, I was brave enough to lead a couple organizational transformations in the past and out here in San Francisco, and I learned pretty quickly working from the C-level on down. So I worked with Expedia on one of them, and I learned that you really have to have a healthy respect for what's worked for the teams and the company, and not dismiss it. And so where can you find these sort of points to basically have influence and leverage? And so quite often, if you're working in an agile way, that's a great sign, because you can start basically modifying some of the agile ceremonies a little bit at a time. So for example, with daily standups, quite often when I go into daily standups, the teams were just talking about all the stories they were working on, and then they went off. And we had the product owner and the user researcher and sometimes a data analyst there in stand-ups, and they would talk about the work they're doing with customer interviews and research and some of the discovery stuff. And we would just talk about it in our daily stand-up like we talk about the rest of our work. And so the why I did that was because I didn't want it to feel like it was an extra thing, right? It's not an extra meeting. I basically modified what they were already doing. You'll notice a lot of ceremonies I list in the book are very similar to Agile. That's not a coincidence. And then with the mapping and the planning and all that, you probably already have spaces, I hope, in your organization to do some of those activities. And what I try to do is start wedging some of these in those activities. So for example, I'm not a huge fan of SAFe. It's a giant agile framework that feels very waterfall to me, but there are giant corporations I work with that use SAFe. And when I come in, I'm like, wow, you probably don't want to take that epic and just like run it through this whole release train and then find out nobody wanted this. So how could we start uncovering this sooner? And that's why I do assumptions mapping earlier on at the epic level. So I say, well, can we at least talk about these assumptions we're making in these so that we can do some discovery work in parallel here? So I try to kind of not necessarily throw out what they're doing, but I try to meet them maybe a half step ahead of where they are and start implementing a little bit of these tools. So I would say if you have some space already for some of these exercises, just start introducing them. I never asked for permission really. So like when I was doing transformation work, a lot of this agile stuff, I just included business model canvas and assumptions mapping and experimentation. And they didn't ask me why I was doing it. It was just like, you need this, so I'm going to put it in there. And I didn't really ask, like, is it okay if I do this? I just did it. So you have to be mindful of like the relationship you have inside the company and the culture. But my big point of takeaway here is it's not going to happen in spare time. So you have to make it part of the way you work. And usually I try to find, what are we doing now? Where can we make these like inflection points better with weaving in different tools? So hopefully that helps, but it is a lot of trial and error.
Thank you, Ivailo. So Marco, you want to go next with a question?
Yes. Thank you, David. It was a very inspiring talk. Apart from Scrum habits, do you have any more rituals about experimentation?
What specifically?
And that's my question. If you have more examples about habits or rituals in experimentation?
So one of the big ones that stand out to me is in the ceremonies I have, and Alex and I made it a point to stress this every time we go into a company, which is you have to make space for learning. Okay. And so I'm always nervous when a team runs an experiment and then doesn't really look at the results and then jumps to the next story or the next thing they want to build. And so what we had to do was start making sure they have time to kind of look at the data. And if I'm working, let's say, with a product owner who doesn't have a data background, then part of that is me finding that data analyst or scientist that can work with the product owner to help. And what we try to do is feed that learning back into the teams. Like if you're doing demos, you could say, here's something we did 2 sprints ago, and this is the impact it had on our customers. And a lot of that feedback loop never makes it back to the team. So I find creative ways to kind of make space for learning and then feed like the experimentation results back into a team in a way where they feel like they're connected to outcomes. And so that was a big learning for me, is that I just assumed people would make time for this stuff, and they weren't. And so they would run an experiment, or they get frustrated it was taking too long to run an experiment, and they would just go build what they wanted to anyway. So I think making that space does help, because you want to take that learning and put it into action.
Okay. A lot of clients always tell me, when they have to stop doing experiments? What do you think?
Well, one, I don't think it ever really stops completely. That's what really makes me nervous about discovery delivery sometimes, when people treat it as phases. Like, we do a discovery phase or discovery sprints, and then we just do a delivery sprint. Quite often you're balancing both. You're either, at the beginning, you're doing a lot of discovery and maybe a little bit of delivery. And then maybe near, a couple years in your journey, you're doing a lot of delivery and a little bit of discovery. But I always worry when it's different phases. So I try to keep it going, because we always have stuff in our roadmap that's not a fact that we need to go test. And also, I go for about 12 weeks and tie the decisions to funding if possible. And so if you go for 12 weeks, and this is something I was doing back at Neo when I was in San Francisco at their office, we would go for 12 weeks and then say, here are the hypotheses we tested. Here's the evidence. Here are what we recommend. And this is like our pivot, persevere, kill decision. Plus, like, if we're asking for funding, we need it to do like these experiments. That's why we're asking for funding. And I think tying it to funding decisions does help a little bit, because if you don't have that, sometimes you could just experiment for too long, and then your leadership team goes, what are you doing? I'm still testing this stuff, just build. But if you tie it to like these, like his internal metered funding approach that I learned from Eric Ries when I was at GE with him. There are some ways where you can tie it to funding and not have it be this emotional decision. It's more about, okay, here's the state of the world. Do we keep going forward with this or not? And so funding does help.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are in the end, and I still have a little question, and I combine that also with a question that was asked also here in the chat, because we are here a lot of design sprinters, and what I realized as well, thinking about your book, reading the book, and now also today, that in the design sprint, when you make your prototype and you test it, there you already have different experiments. So whatever you do as a prototype is one of these many experiments, and then you test it with the user. So you, let's say, you have this interview, the customer interview. Regarding, let's say, a normal design sprint, do you have, let's say, maybe an alternative or an additional way where you say, oh, there might be an improvement, better testing, creating more evidence? Or would you maybe also, because you look always into what do you need to test, or what is the evidence, would you maybe think of adding also this assumption mapping there and adapt the experimentation also in the design sprint? I hope that was clear.
Yeah, so if you go to, and I know there are different groups of design sprinters. I realize that because Kai and her, Google friends, Jake was initially like, but now he's moved on and he has a sprint book. And then they had this timeline where it was like Google, and there was like a couple consultants, like AJ Smart or somebody, and there was like all these design sprinters. There's like a ton of them now, which is great. And if I put the link in chat, it's more of like preference and prioritization technique you can pull in. Mm-hmm. And so the way I typically address sprints is, again, and I'm not an expert in design sprints, although I get pulled into that world sometimes. I try to make sure that we're making it actionable beyond the sprint. And so the map we create, we'll go through, maybe have a prototype, test it with customers, come back and then start updating our artifacts. Mm-hmm. But eventually we want to get to something that's higher strength of evidence and closer to real world and them paying. And so, I think there are many, many different ways to approach a sprint. My only concern with sprints sometimes is they feel very product focused. And I've seen teams really start getting into usability and UI conversations. And I think quite often we mistake, I forget who said this the other day, we mistake like feedback for response. So for example, when they're giving you feedback on the prototype, that's actually not a great thing, because early on, if they're talking about how it flows or how it looks, you're less concerned about that and more concerned usually about, do you find value in the thing? Like, would it be useful in your day-to-day life? And I think sometimes we confuse usability feedback with desirability feedback. And you want a response more than you want feedback on the layout, for example. And so I think that's something we need to be really mindful of in sprinting, is that we don't want a mistake because they gave us feedback on the way this prototype looks, that they also would find it valuable in their day-to-day lives.
Wonderful reply. Thanks so much. I also want to close the call, and thanks for staying longer. I really appreciate. And I put all the links to your Twitter and LinkedIn here on our board as well. And now tell us about your mastermind. So when is that? Do you also have a link for that? I would like to add that to the mural as well.
Yeah, it's on the Strategyzer site. So basically, we do 2 big public events. Well, Alex does more, but I lead 2 big public events each year. And so here is, I think early bird tickets are still going on. Let's see. I believe so. But what I love about that page is it gives you a peek behind the scenes of what a huge production it is. So it's literally professional equipment. We have live music. We have special guests. It's like a mini conference. It's pretty crazy. So I pretty much just block off my week when I do these, because I know I'm going to be emotionally drained by the end. So, but it's 3 half-day sessions with some extra stuff with Alex and I. Wow. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, if you wanna hit that up, the tickets just went on sale like last week or the week before. So we're doing it in May. Okay, I just put it also on the mural board. So thanks a lot, David, and thanks to all of you who attended. We have still a lot of people. So we were, I think, nearly 80. Now we have still 60 here. And we will go now to the lounge and just continue talking at the tables or in the networks. So thanks, David. It was awesome.
Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.